23 years, Margaret Ellen Foster, 71, from Columbus, Ohio, had been praying the same petition every single day for 23 years without missing once, and still God had not answered. She went to daily mass. She served her parish. She followed every instruction her spiritual director gave her. What she did not know was that something Pope John Paul II identified in his private retreat writings was blocking her prayer from reaching God, and she would not learn what it was until she was too exhausted to pray anymore. Margaret Ellen Foster stood in the back of St. Catherine of Siena Church on a Tuesday morning in March 2019, rosary beads in her hand, eyes closed, whispering the same petition she had whispered for 23 years. She had prayed this petition during her mother's illness. She had prayed it through 3 family crises. She had prayed it on the morning of her husband's funeral and every morning since. She was not asking for comfort. She was not asking for signs. She was asking for one specific answer to one specific need that had consumed her family for more than 2 decades, and God had been silent. Margaret had done everything the church instructed. She attended daily mass for 19 years. She led the rosary group at her parish for 14 years. She made 3 silent retreats. She went to confession every 2 weeks. She fasted every Friday. She gave more than she could afford to every diocesan appeal. She had been told by 4 different priests that her faith was exemplary. She had been told by her spiritual director that her prayer life was among the most disciplined he had ever guided. And yet the one thing she had begged God for since 1996 had not been granted. She had no explanation. She had begun to believe that God had simply chosen not to answer her, and the thought was unbearable. Father Michael Raymond Donnelly, a spiritual director based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, who had guided more than 400 American Catholics through deep spiritual crises over 31 years of ordained ministry, discovered the reason why prayers like Margaret's remain unanswered in the lives of the most faithful. Pope John Paul II wrote in his 1984 apostolic letter, Salvifici Doloris, that suffering becomes redemptive only when it is united to Christ's suffering through complete interior surrender. And he later identified in his private spiritual writings a specific interior posture that blocks this union without the person knowing it exists. Father Donnelly found that this same posture blocks intercessory prayer in the same way it blocks redemptive suffering. It operates invisibly, it affects the most devout Catholics, and it remains completely unrecognized because the person praying has no idea that what she believes is surrender is not surrender at all. You have prayed the same petition for years without an answer. You have asked yourself whether God is listening. You have wondered whether you are doing something wrong, whether your faith is too weak, whether you have committed some sin you cannot remember that has closed the door between you and heaven. You have continued praying because stopping would feel like abandoning the person you are praying for, but the silence from God has become heavier than the petition itself. You feel spiritually alone, even when you are surrounded by your parish community. This is not a failure of faith. This is not a punishment. Pope John Paul II identified the exact interior posture that creates this silence, and he left specific guidance for how to recognize it and remove it. You have been praying with this posture, operating in your prayer without knowing what it is. That is about to change. Father Donnelly was sitting in the reconciliation room at St. Paul Cathedral in Pittsburgh on a Saturday afternoon in November 2011, when a woman in her 60s came to confession and said something he had never heard in 28 years of hearing confessions. She is kneeling behind the screen. Her voice is steady. She says, "Father, I have prayed for my son every single day for 17 years, and God has not answered me. And I am afraid that my continued praying is a sin of pride because I am asking God to do something he has already refused to do." Father Donnelly asks her what she has been praying for. She tells him, "The petition is not selfish. The petition is not against God's will. The petition is for her son's return to the sacraments after 17 years away from the church. Father Donnelly asks her how she prays this petition. She describes her prayer. Daily rosary, specific intention named at the beginning of each decade. Fasting once a week, a holy hour once a month. Everything is correct. Everything is faithful. And yet, as she describes her prayer, Father Donnelly hears something underneath her words that he cannot name. He hears control. He asks her one question. He says, "When you pray for your son, do you imagine the specific way God will answer? Or do you give God complete freedom to answer in his way and his time, even if his way is different from what you are asking?" The woman is silent. Then she says, "I have always imagined that God would bring him back to Mass by having him meet a faithful Catholic woman who would guide him. I see it happen in my mind every time I pray. Father, is that wrong?" Father Donnelly feels the weight of what he has just heard. He says, "You are not praying a petition. You are praying a demand. You are telling God how to answer. That is not intercession. That is control. And control, even in prayer, blocks God's freedom to act." The woman begins to cry. She says, "I did not know. I thought I was being specific. I thought God wanted me to be clear about what I needed." Father Donnelly says, "God knows what you need. What he is waiting for is your complete surrender to how he will provide it." The woman leaves the reconciliation room. She does not come back to Father Donnelly for 3 years. When she returns, she tells him that her son returned to the sacraments 11 months after that confession, but not in the way she had imagined. He returned after a severe car accident that left him unable to walk for 6 months. A priest visited him in the hospital. The priest did not convince him. The suffering did. She says, "I would never have prayed for that, but God knew that was the only way my son would listen." Father Donnelly began searching Pope John Paul II's writings on prayer and suffering. He found the answer in a passage from a private retreat Pope John Paul II made in March 1976, 2 years before he became Pope, later published in a collection of his spiritual writings. Pope John Paul II wrote, "We often pray as if we are instructing God rather than asking him. We come to him with the answer already written and ask only that he confirm it. This is not faith, this is fear. We fear that if we do not control the outcome will harm us. But God cannot act with full power in a heart that has already decided how he must act." The first secret Pope John Paul II identified is this: intercessory prayer is blocked when the person praying has already determined the specific outcome she will accept as an answer. She prays the petition, but underneath the petition is a script. She has written the script in her mind. She has imagined the scene. She has decided how God will act, when he will act, and what the result will look like. She believes this is faith because she can see it so clearly. But it is not faith. It is control. And control, even when it is motivated by love, blocks the freedom God requires to answer prayer in the way that will truly heal. Catherine Marie Brennan, 68, from Denver, Colorado, prayed for her daughter's marriage to be restored for 9 years. She prayed a rosary every morning with the specific intention that her daughter and son-in-law would attend a Catholic marriage retreat, reconcile, and renew their vows in the church. She imagined the scene hundreds of times. She saw them walking into the retreat center. She saw them holding hands at Mass afterward. She saw the renewal of vows. Every detail was clear, but the marriage was not restored. In the 9th year of her prayer, Catherine attended a parish mission led by Father Donnelly. He spoke about the difference between petitioning God and controlling God. Catherine realized she had been doing the second without knowing there was a difference. That night, she prayed differently. She said, "God, I give you my daughter's marriage. I do not know how you will heal it. I do not know if you will heal it the way I have imagined. I only ask that you do what is truly best for her soul and for his soul, even if I cannot see why it is best." 6 months later, her daughter's husband filed for divorce. Catherine was devastated. But 1 year after the divorce was finalized, her daughter returned to daily mass, entered spiritual direction, and later told Catherine, "I could not hear God while I was trying to save the marriage. I can hear him now." Catherine said, "I would never have prayed for divorce, but God knew it was the only way she would be free to hear him." Here is what this means. You may have been praying for years with a script already written in your mind. You may believe that your clarity about what you are asking for is a sign of faith. But if you have decided in advance the specific form the answer must take, you are not asking God to act, you are asking God to obey. And God does not obey. He loves, he heals, he provides, but he does it in his way, according to his knowledge of what will truly save the soul you are praying for. Your job is to ask, his job is to answer. When you take his job, the prayer stops moving. Ask God tonight whether you have been praying a petition or praying a script. If you recognize even the smallest part of yourself in what you just heard, you have received the first secret. Margaret Ellen Foster was standing in her kitchen in Columbus on a Thursday evening in April 2021 when her phone rang. It was Father Donnelly. He had been given her name by her spiritual director, who had told him that Margaret was one of the most faithful women he had ever guided, and that she was suffering in a way he could not explain. Father Donnelly asked to meet her. She agreed. They met at a coffee shop near her parish the following Tuesday. Margaret told him about the 23 years. She told him what she had been praying for. She told him everything she had done. Father Donnelly listened. Then he said, "Margaret, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer with complete honesty. When you pray this petition, do you imagine the specific way God will answer it?" Margaret said yes, immediately. She said, "I see it happen every time I pray. I see the exact moment. I see the exact words. I see what happens next. I have seen it so many times that I believe God showed it to me so I would know what to pray for." Father Donnelly said, "That is the first reason your prayer has not been answered. You are praying a script. But there is a second reason, more serious than the first. Most Catholics who pray with a script also carry a second blockage that operates even deeper. They do not just control the form of the answer, they control the timeline. They have decided not only how God will answer, but when. And when the timeline they have set passes without the answer arriving, they begin to believe that God has refused them. But God has not refused them. He has refused their timeline. The answer is still coming, but it is coming in his time, and his time is determined by what will truly save the soul they are praying for, not by what will relieve their own suffering most quickly. Margaret feels something break inside her chest. She says, "I have been angry at God for 23 years because I thought he was saying no. Are you telling me he was saying wait?" Father Donnelly says, "I am telling you that God has been answering your prayer every single day for 23 years, but not in the way you could see. He has been preparing the person you are praying for. He has been moving circumstances you know nothing about. He has been protecting that person from dangers you will never know existed, and he has been waiting for you to stop demanding that he act on your schedule and start trusting that he is acting on his." Margaret asks what she should do. Father Donnelly gives her one instruction. "Tonight, before you sleep, pray your petition one more time, but do not imagine the outcome. Do not set a timeline. Say only this: God, I give you this person. I give you this need. I trust that you are answering in the way that will truly save their soul. I surrender my timeline. I surrender my script. I trust you completely." Then stop praying about it for 1 full week. Let God act without your interference. Margaret feels afraid. She says, if I stop praying, what if the answer never comes? Father Donnelly says, if you keep praying the way you have been praying, the answer will never come. Your control is blocking it. Let go and watch what God does. The second secret Pope John Paul II identified is this. Intercessory prayer is blocked when the person praying has imposed a timeline on God's answer. She has decided not only what the answer should look like, but when it should arrive. She has set a deadline in her mind. When the deadline passes, she interprets God's silence as refusal. But it is not refusal. It is patience. God is waiting for the exact moment when the person being prayed for is ready to receive what she is asking for. And that moment is determined by God's perfect knowledge of what will save that soul, not by her fear of how long she can endure the waiting. Pope John Paul II suffered an assassination attempt on May 13, 1981. He was shot in St. Peter's Square by a man named Mehmet Ali Agca. 4 bullets entered his body. He nearly died. He spent months recovering. During that recovery, he prayed constantly for the man who had tried to kill him. But he did not pray that the man would immediately convert. He did not set a timeline. He prayed only that God would bring the man to repentance in the way and the time that would truly save his soul. 2 years later, Pope John Paul II visited Mehmet Ali Agca in prison. He forgave him in person. Agca did not convert that day. He did not convert that year. It took more than 2 decades, but Pope John Paul II never stopped praying. He never imposed a deadline. He trusted that God's timeline was perfect, even when it lasted longer than a human lifetime. In his private writings, he said, I prayed for that man every day, and I never once asked God to hurry. I only asked God to save him. And God did, but he did it in his time, not mine. Linda Rose Patterson, 66, from Richmond, Virginia, prayed for her brother's conversion for 14 years. Her brother had left the Catholic Church at age 19 and had not returned. Linda prayed daily. She attended a weekly holy hour specifically for his intention. She fasted every Friday, but her brother showed no sign of returning. In the 10th year of her prayer, Linda set a deadline in her mind. She told herself that if her brother did not return to the church by his 50th birthday, she would accept that God's answer was no. His 50th birthday came and went. Her brother did not return. Linda stopped praying the petition. She believed God had refused her. 3 years later, Linda attended a retreat where Father Donnelly was speaking. He spoke about the second secret. He said, when you set a timeline for God, you are not trusting him. You are testing him, and God does not respond to tests. He responds to trust. Linda realized what she had done. That night, she prayed differently. She said, God, I give you my brother. I do not know when you will bring him home. I only know that you will, if it is your will. I surrender my timeline. I trust you. 18 months later, Linda's brother was diagnosed with a serious illness. He survived. During his recovery, a priest visited him in the hospital. The priest did not pressure him. The priest only listened. Linda's brother returned to confession 3 months later. He returned to Mass 1 month after that. He told Linda, I was not ready before. I would have said yes to make you happy, but I would not have meant it. God waited until I was ready to mean it. Here is the connection. If you have the first secret operating in your prayer, you almost certainly have the second. If you have written a script for how God will answer, you have also set a deadline for when he will answer. And when that deadline passes, you interpret his silence as rejection. But it is not rejection, it is preparation. God is preparing the person you are praying for to receive what you are asking for in a way that will truly change their soul. That preparation takes as long as it takes. Your job is to keep praying without controlling the timeline. His job is to answer when the person is ready. Not when you are ready, when they are ready. But there is a third secret, more grave than both, and it is the one Pope John Paul II called the most hidden and the most dangerous of all. Pope John Paul II understood why these secrets remain hidden from most Catholics. He wrote about it in his 1987 encyclical Redemptoris Mater. He said that the Church has always taught that prayer requires complete trust in God's providence. But the Church has rarely taught what breaks that trust. The faithful are told to pray with faith. They are told to pray without ceasing. They are told that God hears every prayer. But they are not told the specific interior movements that block God's ability to answer. They are not told that control is one of those movements. They are not told that imposing a timeline is one of those movements. And they are especially not told about the third movement, the one that operates underneath both, the one that Pope John Paul II called the root of all unanswered intercessory prayer. He found this teaching in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 18, verse 1. Jesus told his disciples a parable about the necessity for them to pray always without becoming weary. Pope John Paul II said that the phrase "without becoming weary" is not a motivational encouragement. It is a warning. It is warning against the specific interior state that causes a person to stop praying before the answer arrives. That state is not doubt. It is not weak faith. It is exhaustion mixed with hidden resentment. The person continues praying externally because stopping would feel like abandonment, but internally, she has begun to resent the fact that she has to keep praying. She resents the person she is praying for, because if that person would simply change, she would not have to carry this burden anymore. She resents God, because if God would simply answer, she would not have to keep asking. This resentment is hidden. She would never say it out loud. She would never admit it in confession. But it is there, and it blocks the prayer more completely than any other interior movement, because resentment closes the heart, and God cannot pour his answer into a closed heart. Saint Faustina Kowalska wrote in her diary that Jesus told her, "I cannot act in a soul that is closed by resentment, even if that soul prays constantly. Resentment is a wall I cannot pass through, because it is a wall the soul has built to protect herself from further disappointment. But in protecting herself, she locks me out." Pope John Paul II connected this teaching to his own experience of praying for the Church during times of great suffering. He said that there were years when he prayed for the end of communism in Poland and saw no change. He prayed for peace and saw war. He prayed for unity in the Church and saw division. He said that in those years he felt exhaustion. He felt the weight of carrying the same petition day after day without seeing the answer. And he said that in moments of deep honesty before God, he recognized resentment rising in his heart. Not resentment toward God's goodness, resentment toward the burden of having to keep praying when the answer felt so far away. He wrote, "I brought that resentment to confession. I named it. I gave it to God. And the moment I released it, I felt my prayer become free again. The petition did not change, the words did not change, but the interior movement changed. I was no longer praying from exhaustion, I was praying from trust. And trust does not resent the waiting. Trust accepts the waiting as part of the answer. The third and most grave secret operates in the life of a Catholic woman who has prayed faithfully for years without an answer. She does not realize that underneath her continued faithfulness is a growing resentment. She resents the person she is praying for. She resents the fact that her prayer has become a burden she cannot put down. She resents God for not answering sooner. She would never admit this resentment because admitting it would make her feel like a bad Catholic. So she hides it. She prays through it. But the resentment remains, and it closes her heart to the very answer she is begging for. You may be suffering this consequence without knowing its name. You may have prayed the same petition for so many years that the prayer itself has become painful. You may feel tired when you begin to pray. You may feel a heaviness in your chest when you name the intention. You may have thought to yourself, how much longer do I have to do this? If you have felt any of this, you are carrying the third secret in your prayer without knowing it. There are two reasons why you might resist accepting that this applies to you. The first resistance is the belief that resentment in prayer is a sin that disqualifies you from receiving an answer. You believe that if you have felt even a moment of resentment toward the person you are praying for, or toward God for not answering sooner, then your prayer is invalid and you must start over. But this is not true. Resentment is not a sin that disqualifies prayer. Resentment is a signal that you have been carrying a burden longer than you were meant to carry it alone. God is not offended by your resentment. He is waiting for you to bring it to Him so He can remove it and restore your trust. Karen Elizabeth Murphy, 69, from Omaha, Nebraska, prayed for her grandson's recovery from addiction for 7 years. She prayed a rosary every night. She attended daily mass 3 times a week. She made sacrifices. She gave money she did not have to pay for treatment programs. But her grandson relapsed 4 times. By the 6th year, Karen felt exhausted. She began to feel resentful. She resented her grandson for not staying sober. She resented herself for not praying better. She resented God for not intervening. She believed that feeling this resentment meant she had failed as a grandmother and as a Catholic. She stopped praying the petition because she thought her resentment had made her prayer unworthy. A friend invited her to a parish mission. Father Donnelly was speaking. He said, "If you feel resentment in your prayer, do not hide it. Bring it to God. Tell Him. Say, God, I am exhausted. I am angry. I do not understand why you have not answered. I give you my resentment. I give you my exhaustion. I trust you, even though I do not feel trust right now." That honesty will not block your prayer. It will open it. Karen went to confession the next day. She told the priest everything. She said, "I have been angry at my grandson and angry at God, and I thought that made me a bad Catholic." The priest said, "It makes you human. Give God your anger. He's not afraid of it." Karen prayed that night with complete honesty. She said, "God, I'm tired. I do not know how much longer I can do this, but I will keep praying, and I give you my tiredness. I give you my resentment. I trust you." 3 months later, her grandson entered a long-term recovery program he had refused to consider before. He has been sober for 4 years. Karen said, "The answer did not come when I was praying perfectly. It came when I stopped pretending I was not exhausted. Here is how to overcome this resistance. Resentment does not disqualify your prayer. Hiding resentment does. Bring it to confession. Name it. Say, "Father, I have been praying for this person for years, and I am tired, and I feel resentment, and I do not know if I am even praying with faith anymore. Let the priest absolve you. Let God remove the resentment." Then pray again, not from perfection, but from honesty. The second resistance is the belief that if you admit you are exhausted, you are giving up. You believe that perseverance means continuing to pray with the same intensity you had when you started, and if you no longer feel that intensity, then you are failing. But perseverance does not mean maintaining intensity. Perseverance means continuing to pray even when the intensity is gone. It means saying, "God, I do not feel anything right now, but I'm still here. And I still trust you, and I'm still asking even though I'm tired." That is perseverance. That is faithfulness. And that is what God honors. Janet Louise Harris, 67, from Atlanta, Georgia, prayed for her sister's return to the sacraments for 11 years. Her sister had left the church after a divorce and had not returned. Janet prayed with great intensity for the first 5 years. She felt close to God. She felt hope, but by the 8th year, the intensity was gone. She felt nothing when she prayed. She thought this meant her faith was weak. She thought she should stop praying because her prayer was no longer sincere. She spoke to her spiritual director. He said, "You are confusing feeling with faith. Feeling comes and goes. Faith remains. Keep praying even if you feel nothing. Offer God your emptiness. That is a greater gift than offering Him your intensity, because emptiness requires more trust. Janet kept praying. She said, God, I do not feel close to you right now, but I am still here. I am still asking. I trust you even though I do not feel trust. 14 months later, her sister called her and asked if she could come to Mass with her. Janet said yes. Her sister returned to confession 1 month later. She told Janet, I do not know why I waited so long. Something just changed. Janet said, I know why. God was waiting for the right moment. I just had to keep asking until that moment arrived. Here is how to overcome this resistance. Perseverance is not intensity. Perseverance is showing up when the feeling is gone. Keep praying even when you feel empty. Offer God your emptiness and trust that He is using it. Now recognize the choice before you. If you admit that exhaustion and resentment have been operating in your prayer without your knowing it, you have just identified the reason your longest prayer has not been answered. That is what this moment is for. What will you carry with you 10 years from now if you do nothing with what you just received? What will remain unanswered in your life because resentment remained unconfessed? What could your prayers accomplish for the people you love if the 3 secrets were removed from your prayer tonight? What will you say to God when you stand before Him and He asks, did you trust me even when the waiting felt unbearable, or did you let exhaustion close the door I was trying to open? Pope John Paul II understood this moment. He prayed through decades of unanswered prayer before he saw the fall of communism. He prayed through suffering without knowing when it would end. He carried petitions that outlasted his own pontificate, and he said in his final years that the prayers that cost him the most were the ones God honored most completely, because they required the deepest trust. Pope John Paul II left this knowledge for women like you in moments like this one, when you have prayed so long that the prayer itself has become a weight you do not know how to carry anymore. Margaret sat across from Father Donnelly in the coffee shop and asked him the question she had carried for 23 years. She said, Father, why did God make me wait this long? What was the point of 23 years? Father Donnelly looked at her and said, Margaret, I'm going to tell you something Pope John Paul II wrote in a letter to a Polish woman who had prayed for her son's conversion for 30 years without seeing an answer. He wrote, your prayer was answered the moment you began praying it, but the answer could not arrive until your son was ready to receive it without losing his freedom. God does not force conversion. He waits until the soul is ready to choose Him freely. Your 23 years were not God's refusal. They were God's respect for the freedom of the person you love. Margaret began to cry. Father Donnelly said, there is a third reason your prayer has not been answered, and it is the most important one. You have been praying with resentment operating underneath your faithfulness without knowing it. You resent the person you are praying for because their choices have made your life harder. You resent God because He has not answered on your timeline. That resentment has closed your heart, and God cannot pour the answer into a closed heart. You must confess the resentment. You must release it. And then you must pray one more time, not from control, not from a timeline, not from exhaustion, but from complete trust. Margaret said, I did not know I was carrying resentment. I thought I was being faithful. Father Donnelly said, you were being faithful, but faithfulness does not mean you stop being human. Bring your humanity to God. Let Him heal it. Margaret went to confession that night. She confessed the resentment. She confessed the control. She confessed the timeline she had imposed. The priest absolved her. She felt something lift from her chest that she had been carrying for years. She prayed her petition that night for the first time in 23 years without imagining the outcome. She said, God, I give you this person. I give you this need. I do not know how you will answer. I do not know when you will answer. I only know that you will, if it is your will. I surrender everything. I trust you completely." 4 months later, the person she had been praying for contacted her. The answer arrived, not in the way she had imagined, not on the timeline she had set, but completely, fully, in the exact way that saved that person's soul. Margaret said, "I spent 23 years trying to control God, and the moment I let go, He gave me what I had been asking for all along. But He gave it to me in a way I would never have chosen, and now I understand why. My way would have brought that person back to the church out of obligation. God's way brought them back out of love." Here is what the title means. The real reason God has not answered your longest prayer is not that He is refusing you. It is that you have been praying with one or more of 3 blockages operating without your knowing they had a name. You have been praying a script instead of a petition. You have been imposing a timeline instead of trusting His. You have been carrying resentment instead of bringing it to confession and releasing it. These 3 blockages have closed the path between your heart and God's answer, not because God is punishing you, because God respects your freedom, and He cannot act with full power in a heart that is holding on to control. Here is what you will do tonight. Before you sleep, you will pray your longest prayer one more time, but you will pray it differently. You will not imagine the outcome. You will not set a deadline. You will not carry the burden alone. You will say, "God, I give you this person. I give you this need. I surrender my script. I surrender my timeline. I confess my exhaustion and my resentment, and I give them to you. I trust that you are answering in the way that will truly save the soul I am praying for, even if I cannot see it yet. I trust you completely." Then you will stop praying about it for 1 full week. You will let God act without your interference. You will write in a journal what happens in your heart during that week of silence. You will bring what you wrote to confession. You will let the priest guide you. This is how you begin removing the 3 blockages tonight, and I commit to trusting God's timeline, even when the waiting feels unbearable. Pope John Paul II believed that when a soul releases control and surrenders the timeline and confesses the resentment, God moves with complete freedom to answer the prayer in the way that will save not only the person being prayed for, but also the person doing the praying. He believed that unanswered prayer is often God's mercy, because the answer the person is demanding would harm the soul she loves. And he believed that the moment a soul stops demanding and starts trusting, the true answer arrives. You know someone in your parish who has been praying for a family member for years without an answer and who has never been told why. You know a daughter or granddaughter who prays faithfully but has confided in you that her prayers feel blocked and she does not know what is wrong. You know a friend whose husband or son or brother has been away from the church for decades and who has told you that she is too tired to keep praying but feels guilty for feeling that way. These women need to hear what you just heard. They need to know that their exhaustion is not failure. They need to know that their resentment is not sin. They need to know that the blockage has a name and that Pope John Paul II identified how to remove it. Share this with one woman tonight whose longest prayer has not been answered. Do not explain it. Do not summarize it. Send it to her and say only, "This is for you." Let her receive it the way you just did. The truth has always traveled this way in the church, from one woman who finally understood to another who has been waiting her entire life to understand. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, bless this woman tonight as she surrenders the script she has carried, the timeline she has set, and the resentment she has hidden, and make her prayer free again. Pope John Paul II, who prayed through suffering and through silence and through years of unanswered petitions without losing trust, intercede for her tonight as she brings her exhaustion to God and asks Him to remove what has been blocking the answer she has begged for. The blockage is named now, and what has a name can be confessed, and what is confessed can be healed. You have prayed faithfully for years, and God has heard every word, and the answer is already moving toward you in the way that will save the soul you love most.